Brian Sandoval, the chairman of WGA, who decided that in his leadership role for WGA over the course of this year, he wanted to create a framework for sharing best management practices on drought response. And so what we're doing through WGA is we're trying to bring together thought leaders and identifying the places where there's opportunities for policy innovations, and there's also opportunities for on-the-ground management strategies that better help communities, states, and industry manage drought. We've already had a workshop series of 5 workshops. You can find out about all of those on WGA's website, westgov.org. There's a section on the Drought Forum that has details about the meeting series, this webinar series, and all of the other resources that we're capturing as part of the project. Those are all housed in our online resource library, and I'll tell you at the end about how you can submit best practices and case studies to the website. Today we are joined by Secretary Michael Teague, the Secretary of Energy and Environment for the state of Oklahoma, who's going to be the moderator for this event. Secretary Teague is going to help moderate the panelists. We have Paul Swaim from CH2M Hill, the Vice President there for the Global Service Leader in Drinking Water Reuse at CH2M Hill. We have Dr. Jerry Sullivan Graham, who is a scientist with the Los Alamos National Laboratory and also the co-chair of the New Mexico Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resource Department's Brackish Water Work Group. Finally, we have Ken Knox, Senior Advisor and Water Resource Manager at Noble Energy, joining us today. Each panelist will deliver brief opening remarks, and then Secretary Teague will ask a few questions of the panelists in order to begin discussion. After their initial discussion, we'll have a question and answer session from attendees. The way that you submit your question and answer is or your questions to be answered, I should say, is you send a chat to me, Carly Brown. I'm listed in the panelist tab, in order to have that passed along to Secretary Teague, who will then ask the panelists that question. If you submit a question to the host, that will probably not go through, so please be sure to send it to me, Carly Brown. We are recording today's webinar. The recording will be posted in just a couple of days, and we'll share that link with you so you can send it around to your colleagues. And again, if you have any technical assistance questions, you can call WGA at 303-623-9378. If there's not any other questions going to my chat box at this time, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to Secretary Michael Teague, Secretary for Energy and Environment for the state of Oklahoma. Secretary Teague?
Thanks, Carly. Appreciate it, and really appreciate you guys setting this up today, along with the whole chairman's initiative. Our thanks to Jim, to Holly, Carly, and Zach for getting us to where we are, and for the whole series of the Drought Forums. We actually had the opportunity to host the first of the workshops here in Oklahoma. We were down at the National Weather Center in Norman with our climate survey. Was talking with Dr. Kevin Claisel, the director of the Oklahoma Climate Survey and the director of our Mesonet this morning. He assured us that the drought is not going away, that it's going to come back in spades this summer. And so this really is the time that we need to make some serious changes. A little bit of background. So the last couple of days I was with the Groundwater Protection Council at their UIC, their annual UIC conference, and Peter Gravatt from EPA headquarters, the Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water, came in and gave his comments, and he said, of the 5 fastest growing states across the country, and I don't know where his information or what survey he was using, but 5 fastest growing states, he listed Texas, Arizona, and Utah. And Florida and North Dakota were the other 2. And all 5 have got water issues, and 3 of them are WGA member states with huge water issues. Texas is expected to increase their population by 50 million people in the next 10 years. So we have got to find some serious solutions on what we're going to do with water so that we can keep not just our economy is going and our way of life, but how we continue to keep our country moving. Very specific recommendations that Peter had. He talked about recycle and reuse, gave San Antonio as the largest reuse system in the nation, and the incredible economic development they've gotten because of proactive water policies and systems. Talked about aquifer storage and recovery. We've talked a bunch of those different options here in Oklahoma, certainly bringing together our energy sector, our agricultural sector, our municipalities, our utilities, because one of the things I would say is that we've got to get out of our silos. This is not one particular part of our economy or another. This really does need to be an all-hands approach. And again, hats off to WGA for bringing all of those different groups together throughout the series of workshops and today as we start this forum. So we really do need to make real changes. We've got to make the best use of the water that we've got, and I mean all the water that we've got, whether it's brackish or fresh, potentially produced. I think there's lots of opportunities there, and I think the panelists today have really got some great some ideas to share with the entire group. So we do need real discussion. This is not intended to be Mike Teague and three speakers give speeches and everybody else sits out there and is quiet. So we really do want you to send your questions to Carly so that we can get a good discussion going on. With that, I'll turn it over to our first presenter, and so Paul Swain from CH2M Hill. Paul.
Well, thank you, Secretary Teague, and good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, I guess, in some places that are participating. It's a privilege to be here and represent some of the work that CH2M Hill has been involved with. So I have a few slides just to set the stage for the later discussion and want to drill in a little bit into the municipal water and wastewater market, as Secretary Teague was just speaking to. And let's talk about current drivers toward increasing potable reuse. So maybe a few definitions first. When we say water reuse, we're talking about recycling treated wastewater for beneficial use. So if you look at the graphic on your slide, we have homes and industry discharging wastewater to a sewer that goes to a wastewater treatment plant, and historically that treated wastewater has been discharged as effluent. In some cases it goes to a water reclamation plant and can go with a higher level of treatment off for irrigation use, agricultural or landscape. It can go to industry for industrial uses, and in some cases recreational or environmental enhancement. We've seen pushes, as Secretary Teague talked about a project in particular, but we've seen pushes towards indirect potable reuse and potable reuse, where indirect is sending the highly treated water into a barrier, a water body or source, and direct potable reuse is sending that water directly to the water utility for their use. So some of the drivers for increasing water reuse are population growth, climate change, drought. No surprises there, I don't believe. But water's scarce, we all know that, especially in the West. And our easy supplies for drinking water have already been tapped. They're not available anymore, and we're turning to different sources, and one of those key sources is the reuse of wastewater. So we're seeing a trend towards reuse in general and a trend away from non-potable reuse towards potable water reuse. There's a couple reasons for that. One, non-potable reuse, the amount of water needed fluctuates with the season, especially for irrigation systems. So we have much less water demand in those winter months than we do the other parts of the year. And then non-potable uses are often geographically separated by long distances, and that can mean high cost of conveyance. So we have to pump and pipe that water to where we want to use it. That adds cost to projects, whereas a potable reuse project, we can send that water just to one location for incorporation at the water treatment plant and be part of the system there. So I'm going to go to the next slide. And there's some key additional drivers for potable reuse, particularly in the state of California. Senate Bill 918 called on the state regulator there for water and wastewater to investigate and report out by the end of 2016 on ways to increase potable reuse. And then the State Water Resources Control Board has a policy to increase water reuse in California as well. And you can see the graph on the right there, 2009 numbers in acre-feet per year. And the goals in California are 1 million acre-feet additional reuse by 2020. So to put that in perspective, 1 million acre-feet, that's 326 billion gallons of water. That's about enough to serve New York City for about 6 months, plus or minus. That's a lot of water, and then the goal increases by 2030. California discharges 3.5 million acre-feet per year of treated wastewater to the ocean. So that increases the numbers I just talked about. And to reuse some of that high amount of water, we're turning to potable reuse, where non-potable reuse becomes costly and infeasible at that scale, and it's more economical to send that water for potable use. And then I thought these numbers at the bottom would be interesting for perspective. This is from a paper by Taffler et al. In 2008, looking at the energy uses for different water sources. So ocean desalination, you can see 3,700 kilowatt hours per acre foot. Two major water sources in California, State Project Water and Colorado River Water, almost similar numbers. And then direct potable reuse, purified water being significantly less energy use as a water source compared to those other options. So next slide. So this is a map of the world, I guess, showing some different potable reuse schemes used in different locations. And the western U.S., and in particular California, has used an approach with membrane filtration, reverse osmosis, usually UV or ultraviolet advanced oxidation, and then they put the water in the ground with soil aquifer treatment. And that approach works well. It's been used in some locations like Orange County Water District for a decade or so or more. And you can see that other parts of the world have followed suit, Singapore, Queensland, using similar approaches. In some locations in the U.S., though, we've seen different approaches used. Key example is the Upper Occoquan Service Authority in Virginia, where we use a different treatment approach with granular activated carbon. And we've written a report from C.H. Tuam Hill, Larry Schimler, and Mary Jo Keeley as lead authors called Fit for Purpose Water, the Cost of Over-Treating Reclaimed Water, and that's Water Reuse Research Foundation Project 1001. And that's drilled into looking at treatment options for direct potable reuse and evaluating whether there's a one-size-fits-all. So next slide. Let me try to wrap up here with my opening remarks. So here's two different reuse treatment trains we drilled into. One is on the bottom is the membrane filtration, reverse osmosis, advanced oxidation approach, and the other is more traditional treatment approach with ozone and biological filtration and granular activated carbon and UV disinfection. And we, as part of this work that I cited, looked at triple bottom line factors, so economics and social criteria, environmental criteria, influenced by this selection, and there's some major differences. If we go to the next slide, in capital costs, we see that the approaches used in Virginia and other parts of the U.S. are much lower cost. And if we have some time, we might look at some of the triple bottom line criteria as well. But one point I want to make is that not everybody lives by the ocean. That's nice in California or Singapore. Here in Colorado, where I am, or in Texas, or parts of Texas, other parts in the western U.S., we don't have an ocean nearby. We can't discharge reverse osmosis concentrate to the ocean, and the costs for potable reuse escalate significantly, as shown in this graph, as we have to treat that concentrate as well. So those were my kind of opening remarks, I guess, related to direct potable reuse and some of the work we've done incorporating sustainability criteria and looking at different treatment approaches to achieve the different objectives we have for reuse.
Okay, Paul, thanks. I appreciate it and appreciate the information. For everybody, we're going to go through the three speakers and everybody do their opening remarks, and then we'll start into the moderated discussion. So to Dr. Jerry Sullivan-Graham with Los Alamos, I think the topic is brackish water.
Thanks, Secretary Teague. I appreciate it, and I want to thank the Western Governors Association for putting this on. I think that these kinds of discussions are absolutely crucial so that we can all understand the issues surrounding the use and reuse of alternative waters and make good decisions as we go forward with this. My first slide here is just so that folks can have my contact information. I work both at Los Alamos National Laboratory as well as down at the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department at the state of New Mexico, and I'll flip to the next slide. We have got a recoverable water initiative occurring now in New Mexico under our Drought Task Force. The governor has put together a Drought Task Force chaired by our state engineer, who is now Tom Blaine. Secretary Martin heads the Recoverable Water Initiative, which comprises two subcommittees and work groups under Brackish and produced water. So we're looking at ways to better implement the use of brackish water and the use and reuse of produced water in the state. And there's actually a set of hearings that are going to go on tomorrow for some new regulations related to reuse of produced water so that oil and gas producers can do a better job at reusing this water in their systems, which is a really neat thing. So I'll go to the next slide. Down at the state, I get a lot of calls from people who want to be able to extract brackish water and treat it and use it. And I think there's a whole number of issues aside from just the desalination part that are really important when you think about implementing brackish water use. One of them is just flat out availability. It has to be in the right place, at the right time, at the right volume. We construct plants in some places in the country, and these often are peaking plants. Basically, they supply part of the water that is used for a municipality or perhaps for a military base or an industry. However, there are big investments that are made, but they're not always going to be used all the time, because our first choice, if we have lots of fresh water available, would be to use that. I mean, that's the way our systems have worked for many, many years. We've been using fresh water. It's delivered cheap to us. And brackish water is kind of a luxury item in some respects. We have to do treatment, of course. Metals, total suspended solids, and minerals that form scale are very common in brackish water. And there's quite a few costs associated, not only with access in terms of pumping from the subsurface, because much brackish water is subsurface groundwater. We have to transport this water, and either with pipelines, or in the case of oil and gas, we would be transporting it with trucks in many cases. And then there's always a waste disposal aspect associated with treatment, either solid material or more commonly liquid concentrate, and that has to be re-injected. And so folks don't always think, okay, I'm going to have a well for extraction, but I also have to have a well for injection of this liquid concentrate. And there are rules and regulations that apply to these wells, as well as construction guidelines and rules. So it can cost quite a bit to cover all the aspects if you're dealing with this disposal, particularly in an inland situation. And I appreciate the segue from Paul on that one. Market analysis. People don't always think about, who's the customer and how much is that customer willing to pay. Municipalities are used to providing water to their customers at low prices. If you raise the price, it gets to be a touchy issue. And I think that we do not always price in the aspect of scarcity. There's not a really good open market for water. So we don't always see prices going up when scarcity increases in all cases. There's a motivation to keep water prices flat. So, the perception that people have as to scarcity does affect the price and how much people are going to pay. There's a considerable infrastructure investment, capital costs that are needed when you are building a plant to treat brackish water. And then we also have to deal with risk perception, both industrial and for human uses. Folks are not always willing to accept water that isn't out of their river or their normal source of water, like their reservoir, and so they will have questions and want to know, what are the problems that I might get? Will there be arsenic in the water, for example, or for industrial, is the salt mix in the water going to be correct for what I need to do? Safe use in the environment. This is absolutely crucial, and it's something that New Mexico is definitely taking a look at. Just the handling of water, brackish water, is a bigger deal than it is for normal freshwater handling operations. If you have a pipeline and you have a leak, you've got a real problem. So our traditional methods of moving water around have to be examined very closely. We have to be very careful not to impinge upon freshwater resources. There's a perception that there is a lot of brackish water out there in the western states in particular, and indeed there are reservoirs that do have a lot of saturated thickness with brackish water in them. However, those are sometimes connected with fresh groundwater resources as well. There are no confining layers, or if you're in a basin situation, you may be connected to sources of recharge. And so if we draw down brackish water reservoirs, we need to be sure that they are not going to also draw down freshwater resources as well. And this is really important. Operations, like I said, spills can be a problem. If we're drilling wells into brackish water, those wells need to be corrosion resistant. Our pipelines, pumps, and storage mechanisms need to be corrosion resistant. There are long-term sustainability issues with brackish water. If we have brackish water that is in a closed reservoir that is not connected to fresh water, we need to be aware that there may have to be some planned obsolescence of that reservoir. We can only pump but for so long before the costs of pumping get too high or the amount of discharge that we're able to obtain becomes too low. And so we have to consider recharge to these reservoirs and if it is going to exist. So to do that, you have to have good hydrologic studies, and you have to have good data in your region or your basin where you're going to implement use. There's a lot of policy issues that need to be addressed in some states because brackish water has never been accessed before in many cases. So looking at water rights or rights of capture are very important. We need to consider, if our policies that have been applied to freshwater resources also apply to brackish water. And we also need to think about interbasin transfers and what that does to the hydrology of different regions and the freshwater resources. So policies, of course, feed into our regulations. We need to bring those up to speed with our current state of knowledge and interest in brackish water. Financing, it can be public or private. Sometimes it's a combination of both. Our facility in Alamogordo, for example, there's a new treatment facility going in there, and that is both a public and private. And then so we have a partnership in that case, and there's a number of different structures. I'll just make one final note, and that is with the next slide, that the DOE, which is who I interact with quite a bit, is looking at the energy-water nexus and the amount of energy that it takes to treat and move brackish water, as well as the amount of water that it takes to create the energy that we use in water treatment and other things in this country. So I just want to refer folks to this report. It's a nice report and came out this past year, and it should be very useful to folks. That's all I have.
Jerry, thanks. The last presenter is Ken Knox from Noble Energy. Ken?
Good day, folks. Thank you, Secretary Teague. Paul and Jerry laid an outstanding foundation. What I'm going to focus on is in regards to the energy produced water development opposed to the municipal that, for instance, Paul discussed. This first slide is just to try to illustrate the transformation. Water, produced water, flowback water in the energy discipline historically has been viewed as a nuisance, a waste, something to be managed. However, I do need to emphasize now that the entire water management program has to go from a full life cycle, from the sourcing of the water, the use, the management from pipes versus trucks, etc. But the point I really want to focus on today is the disposal, the treatment, the recycling of those wastewaters is now at the forefront of development of energy plays throughout the United States, North America, and frankly, the world. So next slide, please. So all our alternatives. Traditionally, up to a few years ago, the predominant, if not exclusive, method of disposing of these flowback and produced waters that are received back as part of the hydraulic fracturing process was discharged in deep underground injection wells. There were also some smaller scale in areas where it was put into lined ponds for evaporation, and then also perhaps off-site commercial disposal facilities. Those last two, the evaporation and the off-site commercial disposal, they tend to be decreasing in popularity with the advancement of additional regulatory as well as environmental issues. So really what we're focusing on today, and I believe the future, is in regards to the treatment, the recycling, and reuse. One of the things I would like to emphasize, folks, is please consider every geologic formation, energy company, locale has its own nuances. For example, part of my work with Noble is ranging from the Marcellus Basin in Pennsylvania and West Virginia, Colorado to Nevada. All of those have unique chemical, petrochemical characteristics, and so that inherent water, the wastewaters, have unique nuances as well. So we tailor or customize, if you will, our processes to meet those in situ type of conditions. We typically don't use a single form of treatment for the recycling and reuse. It's often a train, if you will, that includes chemical, physical, and mechanical processes. And we, of course, want to integrate that within the freshwater water supply system. What I'm speaking of there is, please consider when we're using hydraulic fracturing, that is what is bandied about most in the public perception for energy development. That serves as approximately 95 to 98% of our total demand, the other being drilling, dust control for site construction, etc. But when we're using that water, we are also capturing this, treating it, and blending it with our freshwater supplies in an increasing ratio so that we are reducing our freshwater demands. That refers back to that full water cycle diagram. The fact that we can continue to advance our recycling and reuse has that beneficial component of reducing overall freshwater supply demands. Next slide, please. So what are some of the applications we use for this? Well, the logistics of this gets a bit exciting or perhaps challenging at times. Oftentimes our energy development is over a wide, disparate type of regions, both topographical, scale. And so trying to capture this from individual wells, convey it through pipelines now instead of trucks, for storage in lined multi-barrier tank facilities. That is something that we're advancing on today. We talked about the treatment options and the uses. But what we're trying to do is manage all of these in an integrated manner so that we have, frankly, the business decisions where we integrate the cost, the quality, the amount, and the location. And focusing upon that, a wise business decision, it's the right thing to do as well, but integrating recycling and reuse of waters in context of, yes, the environmental, but also the community values. Because as was spoken to earlier, those of us in the Western United States recognize the precious value of water resources within our irrigation, rural water supply, other commercial neighbors. Next slide, please. In terms of agriculture, oftentimes one of the responses we hear is, why don't we treat and recycle this water and just put it back for application on farms for irrigation of crops, stock watering, etc. There are times and places, frankly, where that works. There are also times where it doesn't work from very practical effects. One of the issues is if you're in the high plains of northeastern Colorado, oftentimes the soils don't promote long-term farming practices. It's range country. So frankly, there's not a demand or a market for water in that area. In other parts of Wyoming where we practice this, stock watering, the use of these treated waters for those ranchers is highly coveted. So that's part of what we're doing. And also, again, it gets into the logistics. Trying to capture these in an integrated network for delivery at a localized scale. And I believe the final slide, please. Oh, excuse me, one more. So the regulatory considerations. As Jerry spoke of earlier, the water rights and the permits. We have the nuances of the doctrine of prior appropriation, riparian doctrine, the blends thereof in the 17 Western United States, being respectful of those existing water rights and, frankly, the Byzantine nature of groundwater law in the Western United States as well. We must recognize and work within those systems. The water quality and environmental compliance, they tend to evolve. And they're often site-specific at a localized scale on a county or even a smaller subsidiary of a municipality that we must address as well. One of the other challenges we have from a business application is navigating through those evolving, well-thought-out requirements when we have multiple jurisdictions. Next slide, please. So, our use is through the irrigation, stock watering, construction, and dust control. We actively promote and use that. It takes a waste and applies it to beneficial use, has the supplemental demand of decreasing our freshwater supplies. We've talked about the logistics about it and the regulatory considerations as well. And so one of the discussion items I'm hoping to get input myself and learn from is in particular regard to guidance the audience and other panel members might provide us in navigating through multiple government agency levels. So thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Okay, so I've got a question here for each of the panelists, but those are meant for the rest of you to start sending your questions to Carly. This truly is meant to be interactive and really to be able to answer some of the questions across all of our states. So, Paul, I'll start with you. Your graph that had the capital costs for different reuse treatment schemes, and on the bottom it had the energy use, which I thought was really interesting. How do annual O&M costs compare? Is that something that you guys have looked at as well?
Yeah, thanks, Secretary Teague. So I guess I got so excited at the beginning I didn't make one major point, which is probably inherent from the graphs I'm showing or showed on capital costs, and here's the O&M graph popping up. But we have the technology. We can treat, you name the contaminant, we can treat for it at this point in time. So now we're getting into the details of what's the most appropriate way to do that. So if you look at the O&M cost graph here that's popped up on the screen, you can see that the ozone, biological filtration, granular activated carbon, UV disinfection approach is significantly lower O&M cost too, and there's some fluctuations with how often you replace your carbon media, but as a whole, the O&M costs are quite a bit less than the more traditional coastal approaches where you're using high-pressure membranes. Those have higher energy use, and then the cost of dealing with the concentrate as well. And when we look at the sustainability criteria as well, if maybe we have a quick second to look at the next graph, greenhouse gas footprint, for example, kind of follows suit with the O&M costs, and we have a much lower carbon footprint. And here it's been monetized, but a much more sustainable approach. So there's some big differences in the treatment approaches. They both work, but there's some big differences in cost and sustainability that we recommend looking at on a site-by-site basis.
Okay. Jerry, you talked about brackish water desal, and certainly different from seawater desal, which is the one that I'm most familiar with. Actually, surprisingly, but the military, the Army's got a desal plant in the Sinai, and I got to learn more about desal than I ever wanted. But can you explain the differences between brackish water desal and seawater?
Absolutely. One of the key things is the location, and Paul mentioned this earlier as well, is that brackish water desalination is often also equated with inland desalination. When you do seawater desalination, you've got a great big reservoir of water that is a known salinity. About 35,000 milligrams per liter is the typical seawater salinity. Brackish water will vary widely in its quality, and it'll be up to roughly about 10,000 milligrams per liter is kind of a definitional cutoff, although it's not limited to that. But brackish water is going to be from a variety of different kinds of reservoirs in the subsurface. It's going to have different chemistry no matter where different reservoirs will have different chemistry, so you need different treatment processes tailored to that specific location. And then you have the concentrate disposal. For seawater desal, you can discharge the concentrate back into the ocean. The relative proportions of the constituents are about the same as what's in the ocean, so dilution is indeed a solution there. But for inland desal, you have additional costs in handling associated with subsurface injection or perhaps evaporation ponds. So that's the difference.
Okay, thank you. And Ken, you talked about, smart ways to use produced water. Actually, the question is, what regulatory roadblocks do the energy companies see in being able to use produced water? And it's a question we've asked a bunch here in Oklahoma, not only from drought solutions, but also looking for some earthquake solutions. But what do you see are some of the regulatory roadblocks that you guys have encountered?
Well, thank you, Secretary Teague. It's a tough balance. Energy companies, we've certainly recognized the value, and frankly, between the rock and the hard place, the regulatory agencies exist. One of the challenges, the most problematic, I think, for all, is the timeliness or evolution. If I can give you somewhat of an example, when an energy company is coming into a basin, developing a source of supply, sometimes making the conscious decision not to compete with other neighbors and seek a deeper non-tributary source. At first blush, that seems acceptable all around. It's using perhaps more brackish water that's suitable for energy needs. It's not competing with the tributary water supplies serving irrigation or other rural domestic supplies, etc. However, as that starts, and it's based upon, that application, those business decisions are based upon existing statutory law. Like all good things that seem to work, others join in. The demand increases to the point it garners additional concern by the public that prompts sometimes policy intervention or intermittent rules by well-intended regulatory officials trying to get their arms around it. But the effect of that is it changes the business profile, often delaying things, including energy development, by years. And I'm not sure that those consequences are fully vetted because they tend to be more of a reactive, often, bent to those that are coming in with more of a singular point of view.
Ken, following up on that, do you see at the state level, or maybe at the federal level as well, Do you see that it's because you get different regulatory agencies focused on certain aspects? You know, for us in Oklahoma, it's a Water Resources Board and a Department of Environmental Quality and a Corporation Commission that regulates the oil and gas industry. Do you see that it's a disconnect between agencies?
I think that's well said and certainly part of it. I mean, Mr. Secretary, it's pretty clear, at least in my mind and understanding, the dominant water authority and regulatory control has been vested to state agencies. Of course, the federal government has an important role on that. It's when you start to encroach upon NEPA or other federal applications, the tension sometimes arises not between the energy companies necessarily, but between the federal and the state agencies. Who has control over that energy development process? That prompts issues, discussion, etc., that can sometimes have a chilling or certainly a time-deferred impact. Oftentimes that's warranted. I mean, no one wants to impact the environment or the community in an irresponsible manner. But a little coordination beforehand would be sincerely appreciated.
Yeah, thanks for that part, Ken. It's something that I found when I was with the Corps of Engineers between federal agencies. It's something that at the state level we think that our agencies are working really well together, but always room for improvement. And so I think at both levels we've got some stuff that we can do. Okay, we're starting to get a couple of questions coming in here now, so I'll ask the first one from Catherine Dahm, the question for all the panelists. What do you consider the major research needs in each of your respective areas for implementing water reuse? Paul, you want to start?
Sure. So the Water Reuse Research Foundation has done an outstanding job of jumping into that exact question, and they've raised a good deal of funding in California given the significant drought and hatched a number of research projects covering all sorts of different areas. Some of the other research organizations in the municipal sector, such as the Water Research Foundation, are doing the same thing. But some of the developing areas relate to what should the standards be. And right now that's kind of a state-by-state consideration where California's really led the way and focused in on what kind of pathogen barrier do we need through treatment for different methods of reuse, and what are some of the implications on, good old-fashioned water chemistry when waters are merged together. There's a number of different areas of research that are going on, ranging all the way to how do we communicate with the public and make sure that that kind of fear factor goes away. So, I mean, I think we're on top of research needs. There's a whole slew of great projects going on and more planned because I think our industry has realized that this is an incredible resource to have wastewater that we can reuse in times of drought in particular. So I think that research is already underway to a large extent.
Jerry, research is kind of at least one of your halves over there with the lab. So what are your thoughts to it?
Well, I have a tendency to think, of course, on the energy side of things, working with Department of Energy. And so I think as we move into using water that is not necessarily fresh, we have to consider the energy consumption that will accompany the treatment and the transport that's going to be needed. This is a big change to our systems, and so understanding what this does to the amount of energy that we're going to have to create and insert into the process is going to be important. I think the use of renewables, for example, is going to be an important part of that. It'll also keep the costs down, we hope. And then I think the other part of it is understanding responsible use and the big picture surrounding different watersheds or basins. If we change how we are using water in a basin or a watershed, we need to be aware of what happens to the other users in that watershed and to the natural system as well.
Ken, I don't know if everybody, at least it's probably not as well known just how much research goes on within your industry. I mean, we think of the GEs and their R&D facilities, but the industry is very involved in the research and the R&D side of this. So what are your thoughts on research needs?
Well, they're acute. I mean, to reduce the freshwater demands, but frankly, from a business perspective, getting ahead of the game puts those that engage in this actively and frankly a more robust competitive advantage. To answer the question, yes, we need to go and focus upon the research that allows us to recycle and reuse these flowback and produced waters. To that end, I can share from our company's perspective, we've entered into a very robust research and development program where we work with proposed vendors. Those vendors range from GE to a person with a test kit in the trunk of a Buick. Many universities. We work with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden, all designed to maximize our recycled waters and frankly to drive the cost down. And we're doing that to the point we're developing mobile and some fixed facility plants that operate in the range of 200 to 500,000 gallons per day of capturing that flowback water, recycling it, and reusing it. So it's an actual ongoing practice.
Is this one. Thanks, Ken. Okay, the next question is from Alan Matheson from Utah. Treated effluent often goes downstream to satisfy downstream water rights and environmental needs. How can reuse be advanced in situations where there is already reliance on the return flows? It's open for the whole panel. Anybody have any thoughts? Paul?
Yeah, I don't have brilliant thoughts on that. I mean, it's an excellent question and one, again, that gets into the need to make the right decisions for the specific community. So I don't have any more to add than that.
I can try that one. This is Jerry. Basically, there's a real lack of information out there on a basin scale to understand what the impacts are if you start changing the use in different, one place, and you have a potential user farther downstream. I know the states are trying to get a handle on this, but I think some of the things that need to be done include better data collection that is more tailored to answering this sort of question. So state agencies are one player in that, but also research groups as well. And then I think the regulations are going to need to be flexible and open to understanding these scenarios and creating a balance. I think maybe an open market would also help. So.
Yeah, what I would add from from what we've been able to learn on the same question, I think that Dallas Fort Worth area has got a man-made wetlands facility down there that North Texas Municipal Water District operates. And if I remember right, they have something as part of their permit that they have to provide a certain amount of downstream flow to make sure that they meet the downstream water requirements. Okay.
Secretary,
go ahead.
Secretary Teague, this is Ken Knox. Just to build upon what you said, and a bit of a confession, I was a former water administration official in Colorado. The question is quite insightful. This is analogous to a lot of folks talking about conservation. Any type of reuse and recycling and research that may cause an adverse impact to Dallas or any other vested water right cannot occur through this process. That's part of working within those water right and permit systems. Advancements to reuse this water is very beneficial, but not at the cost of impacting a downstream water right or permit.
Yeah, I would agree. Certainly when the downstream folks are being impacted by the same drought, You may have a different conversation if you were in a flood fight, for instance, or, at a time of the year where you had excess water. But, again, it goes back to we're really trying to figure out solutions for a drought.
Well said.
Okay, next question from Chris Codolese, and I apologize for screwing up the pronunciation of that. Can any of the panelists talk more about the move from non-potable reuse to potable reuse? How is that progressing across the country, and which states are leading in it?
Yeah, this is Paul. I'm happy to talk to that. I think I covered a little bit of that early. California is certainly at the forefront of that, and it's really a economic driver for where's the use going to be for that water. So if we can convey it to the water utility and there's a steady demand for that water, then that's more economical than sending reused water to golf courses and industry and spread out places where we have to pump and pipe and have longer conveyance costs. So that's one of the drivers for direct potable reuse. The year-round use is higher compared to indirect. In terms of states leading the implementation, in addition to California, Texas has a number of have been fairly high-profile projects driven purely by water scarcity. And Big Springs, Texas, Wichita Falls, Texas, are in various stages of implementing their own direct potable reuse projects driven purely by need. Oklahoma has some projects under consideration, so we're seeing really, you name where the drought is most severe, and those are the places implementing projects.
Paul, maybe outside the scope of the Western governors, but have you seen or CH2M Hill been involved in anything outside of the Western states that have been impacted by drought? I'm thinking more Florida, Georgia, Alabama, some of those areas that are having freshwater concerns, maybe not necessarily the drought the way we see it, but still water issues. Are you seeing anything in other states?
Yeah, there's lots of reuse projects in other states, not direct potable reuse projects per se. Internationally, though, we have Australia in Queensland showed up on my map, and they had a severe drought. Other places in Australia as well. So we've been working on a project called the Beanyip Project. That's a potable reuse project in Australia. So even beyond the U.S., this is a hot topic.
Okay. Not having any other questions coming in from the crew. We've got a couple we had set up ahead of time. Jerry, what kinds of studies should be done to determine if brackish water exists and is useful for a particular community?
Well, it's interesting because brackish water isn't a resource that has been well characterized in many places because it wasn't what the target was when we were drilling for freshwater. Usually if you were drilling a well, you stopped when you got down to the brackish water and you backed up. So in many cases we have a lack of information. I will say that the USGS, Texas, and some other folks, including Bureau of Reclamation, have done some very good work looking at brackish water resources, and the GS is now doing a very large study across the country to try and better assess what is there. I think that oil and gas could contribute strongly to this. I think there's also geothermal folks at the DOE who could also contribute to this kind of information. But then we've got to take that and get it out to the states and the potential users for this water. So that's going to be another place where stakeholder outreach is going to be very important. And I think DOE is possible as a good leadership group to try and lead things. They're deciding how they're going to work with that now, but it would definitely have to be in conjunction with other federal agencies like the GS and rest of the Department of Interior and EPA, et cetera, as well as the states.
Okay. The next question we've come in, actually we've gotten a couple of, several folks who have sent these in on the same topic, and it expands, Jerry, on what you were just talking about for brackish water, but it goes to reuse. So what about regulatory uncertainty for water reuse and produced waters? For example, homeowners associations directly reusing water for irrigating, anything for the group to add. And we've seen some of the same things here within the state in Oklahoma, that some communities certainly recognize the problem and want to be very aggressive. And the question is, do we have the regulatory framework in place? Do we need to change our state statutes to be able to incorporate reuse and recycling? But thoughts from the panel on that one?
Secretary Teague, Paul, I think you kind of just hit the nail on the head. Reuse is unique in a way on the municipal side because it's regulated differently from state to state, and there are probably a myriad of issues that need to be navigated differently from one location to another. And we don't have a national regulatory approach developing for level of treatment, let alone the issues that this question gets into are interesting ones and certainly need more attention.
This is Jerry. I can speak at least to New Mexico, and I mentioned this earlier, is that we are revising regulations for oil and gas so that they can actively reuse produced water. It'll improve the mechanisms that they have to use recycling facilities, to invest in these facilities. And I think the state legislators are very excited about the possibility that it will take trucks off of the road. The other thing that's going on is that there have been state regulations revised to allow for recycling of gray water and reuse at the homeowner level.
Secretary Teague, from an energy perspective, we have almost unanimous consent when we're reusing the water for industrial purposes. But through advanced recycling and treatment processes, we're able to use that for other applications. And that's where some assistance, identifying and knocking down some roadblocks to serve those communities would be very helpful.
Yeah, Ken, following up on that, and so does that get to folks breaking out? The way I say it is they got to break out of their silos. I mean, we talk a lot on the energy industry here in Oklahoma and recycle and reuse, but how do we get the ag industry to be part of that conversation? How do we get the municipalities, the M&I water part of it? How do we get the utilities? Does that go to what you're talking about once you break out of that silo, that you start getting into different regulatory frameworks and different agencies get involved?
And one example, yes, sir, it does. And one example we did was, we're still in the nascent stages of it, but we created a forum where we bring in top leadership from the Department of Natural Resources in Colorado. We bring in, frankly, engineering expertise from engineering firms, representatives of the agricultural community, environmental community, basically everyone. And we've set up a detailed research program that's funded through multiple sources. State, environmental, energy are all funding this type of research and, frankly, that policy development. It's a start.
So this tags onto that same topic, and I think it's for the whole panel, but this may go back to Ken in his previous life. I think he mentioned as a water regulator in Colorado, because I think Colorado's looking at it. Does produced water or reused produced water now become a new source of water that has to be regulated and get into water rights discussions?
It depends on my layman's perspective is it depends on the original source. If it's non-tributary waters or others that are considered to be under the dominion and control, then they may reuse that, again, as long as those return flows don't impact a downstream entity. When you get into the tributary supplies, however, that becomes much more of a conundrum that we're working through presently.
I'll note in New Mexico that as long as oil and gas produced water is reused within the industry, it is not considered to have a water right, and it is an exempt water. However, once that water is treated and released to the public venue, so to speak, then it can be assigned a water right, and that's an area where more work is needed to understand how that would all fit together.
Yeah, Paul, have you guys been engaged in that discussion at all? I thought that Colorado was actually looking at creating a class of water tied to produced water or recycled water.
You know, I can't comment to that, unfortunately.
Okay. All right, I think we are right on schedule, and if everybody else's calendar looks like ours, you're probably running off the phone to get to your next meeting. Carly, thanks again for the opportunity to bring everybody together. To Paul, to Jerry, to Ken, really appreciate the time that you took to put your presentations together and for the prep calls ahead of this forum today and for your insights today. Really, really helpful, certainly for us here, and I hope it was for everybody else that was on the line. So, Carly, I'll pass it back to you.
A really great discussion. Just wanted to give you guys a reminder that we will have a recording of this webinar, and we'll send around the link along with a couple of highlights from this panel so that you can review that for yourself, pass it along to colleagues. You can look for that from us by the end of the week. We just want to thank all of the attendees for joining us for this first webinar. We're going to have 5 more webinars held on the 2nd and 4th Wednesdays of the month, now through the middle of April. So please look back at our schedule and join us for community outreach and consumer technology, drought data, managing forest health for water resources, the differences in hydrology and legal structures and how that interplays into drought response. All of those topics are coming up. We're hoping that you'll join us again for that. And we also hope that you will take a look at the westgov.org Drought Forum page. We have a couple of pages there with resources, best practices, and case studies. And if there's something that we're missing, either from you and your work or just something that we've, that we've skimmed over, we are totally receptive to hearing that and fixing that. So there's information on the site about how you can submit your recommendations. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of the questions. We are going to archive those or we're going to look through those and see how we can better respond to those of you that didn't get your questions answered. And with that, I just want to thank you, everyone, again, and especially Secretary Teague and all of our panelists today. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.